Hello to everyone and welcome back to Feel Good with ME. I'm your host Idan, and today it's an absolutely pleasure welcoming one of the most well-known researchers in the field of ME, chronic fatigue syndrome. It is Professor Leonard Jason. And Professor Jason, maybe you can introduce yourself a little bit to our audience, how you got into researching about ME, about your educational background, what you found in your research, and also there is something that you developed and coined, which is very helpful. It is the envelope theory of energy. Maybe you can tell us a little bit about that and how it can help us manage our low energy levels on a day-to-day living and trying to get on with life.
Sure. Well, thank you for inviting me to your podcast. I have been working in this area for over 30 years. And what has really amazed me over this period of time is how patients in general have been not brought into the process in either naming the illness, in either providing recommendations for treatment, or in basically helping to develop the case definitions or assessing the symptoms. So the fact that the patient community has felt very much left out of these critical processes is something that myself as a psychologist is most interesting. And the question is, why? Why have patients not been more involved? Think of it. The name of this illness, myalgic encephalomyelitis, occurred in the 1970s, 1980s. And we have people like Melvin Ramsey and Byron Hyde and others who have basically said this is an illness that is serious, and it sounds serious, and it is serious. And then in 1988, we have the Centers for Disease Control taking that illness and giving it a new name, calling it chronic fatigue syndrome. That's amazing that they could have the hubris to sort of rename the illness, focusing on one symptom, which does not really accurately characterize the illness, nor does it convey to others the seriousness of it, because it's very easy for people to say they're fatigued because 1 out of 4 people is fatigued, but it's not the small amount of fatigue most people experience. It's a devastating aspect of fatigue, and really, much more importantly, post-exertional malaise that characterizes this illness. Not only the name has been taken from the patients, but the case definition. And again, we go back to Melvin Ramsey, who wrote about this for years, describing a clinical condition. And then we have people in the United States, first name Holmes, and then later Fukuda, who basically said, well, these are the symptoms of the illness. And the interesting thing is the Fukuda criteria, which is the Centers for Disease Control criteria that's the most often used, does not require the core symptoms of the illness. Again, patients left out of the process of naming and the definition of the illness. The case definition of the illness could basically include a person without post-exertional malaise, without cognitive impairment, and without unrefreshing sleep. Fukuda criteria does not make them requirements. So just think about it. Coming up with a name that's trivializing, coming up with a case definition that leaves out the most important symptoms, it's remarkable. And the same issue has been parlayed into estimating prevalence rates, as well as the instruments used. Many of the instruments used to capture fatigue, for example, the shoulder fatigue scale, do not do a very good job of differentiating people with ME versus people with major depressive disorder. The scales weren't developed to really do that. A lot of the early scales really just looked at the occurrence. Does it occur or not? But the problem is many of these symptoms occur very frequently in the normal population. It's not the occurrence of fatigue, or it's really the severity that differentiates. And if you use the right instruments in the right ways, you can do 100% differentiation from solely major depressive disorder from ME. But if you don't use the right instruments and you're not sensitive to these issues, what you will ultimately do is bring in people who don't have this illness, because major depressive disorders have fatigue and have a number of these somatic problems, but they're different. For example, a person with a major depressive disorder, if they basically push themselves too much, they're going to feel better. The person with ME is going to feel post-exertional malaise. If you asked a person with the solely depressive disorder, what would you do tomorrow if you were better? They'd say they don't know. You'd ask that to a person with ME, and they'll give you a list of 100 things. So they don't have that self-reproach. People with ME are basically have something different than depression. But if you bring those people in with lifestyle and depression reasons for their somatic complaints, and then you basically put them into trials that have more psychologically based treatments like cognitive behavior therapy, and you get people doing much better because you put the wrong people into the trials, then the conclusion is basically, well, all we need to do is have people think differently and exercise, and they'll get over this thing. Worse than that, if they don't do these things, they're malingerers. So patients are being blamed for basically not improving when they basically had their name stripped from them, the case definition imposed on them, when they've had inappropriate assessments on them, and then put into treatments that basically are not helpful. With that context, it's an amazing area to be working in. And as a community psychologist, I've benefited so much from close relationships with patient groups and organizations, because they have guided me in trying not to make the same mistakes, in trying to basically legitimize this illness and not delegitimize and further stigmatize patients with this illness. So that has been my 30 years. And I've worked on basic epidemiology, where we try to appropriately define and identify patients. And our current estimates are suggesting that rather than just this being a rare disorder that basically affects only white middle-class people, our prevalence research suggests about 1.5 million people in the US have this illness. So it's not a rare disorder, and it affects all ethnic groups. And that most of the people with it have never been diagnosed. So again, epidemiology is very important to get right. And if you get it wrong, you can end up further stigmatizing patients. And I've also done work with what's called the energy envelope. And the energy envelope has a very different way of thinking about what's important for patients. If you basically have a person who is exhausted and is basically doing too much, just trying to get food, trying to get their cleaning of their place, trying to meet the most minimum expectations, and then you tell that person, well, go home and twice a week exercise for a half hour, that person is likely to get worse. Now, we know that in the world, there's literally millions of people with COVID-19 who have not recovered. These are called long COVID, long haulers, or PASC, whatever you want to call them, but they're going to have very comparable problems that they're going to be told to push themselves beyond their exertion limits. And what that will do is make it even harder for them to recover, for them to get better, or for them to not continue to deteriorate. So the key question is, what is the energy envelope? The energy envelope says, don't push yourself beyond your energy boundaries, but you have perceived energy it might have been 100 on a 100-point scale. That's how much you had. And your expended energy probably was about 100. And you were fine. And you didn't have really any symptoms when you were healthy. Now your body is differently. Your perceived energy on a 100-point scale might be 20 or 30. And if your engaged energy, how much you basically push yourself, is closer to a 40, it's like a battery. It's constantly draining itself. And if you want a battery to get recharged, you can't keep pushing it twice beyond its limits. And that's what's happening with a lot of patients. They have a battery that has been deep. It's basically very, very low. And it's basically has a lot of activity going on. So what our suggestion is, keep that battery under basically low limits. Keep that battery so that the perceived energy and expended energy is about the same. And if one does that, one has a better chance of basically having less possibility of deterioration and maybe even some improvement. So that's what we basically suggest as helping to cope with people, cope with this illness. And when we've given surveys to patients and asked them what's the most helpful thing they can do, what do you think comes up at the top of the list? Pacing, staying within the energy envelope, trying to be careful how much one does. And that is what we've been talking about since the mid-1990s in the United States. Ellen Goudsmit in Great Britain has been working on that as well during this time. And truthfully, it is an alternative for not only those people with MECFS, the millions of people around the world who are suffering from this illness, but also for the additional millions that are going to come into this category due to COVID-19.
Thank you so much for this introduction and explaining to us a bit more. I have to say that at the beginning bit, when you explained how they stripped away the name and our rights and make it sound more taken as seriously, a bit of a laughable condition. They used to use the Yappy flu name as well. It's crazy that it happened, and it's so harmful that I will think twice now before I'm saying chronic fatigue syndrome again. I'd rather call it ME at its real name. Yeah, it's just unbelievable that they misunderstood to that level what we're going through. And when you mentioned the person with a depressing disorder, which is respectable, and it's a very difficult illness, of course, that deserve all the treatment that it does and attention. But as you said, the next day, if you ask them if you had energy, what would they do? And they would say that they're not sure, which is probably with most people that are going through a difficult time due to depression or such a situation. But people with ME, often, yes, we have a bucket of list of what we want to do. I'm a living proof of it. I used to teach at the university psychology myself just for 2 years. And the university even paid to my master's degrees. I was so passionate. I had to fight for my education. I'm dyslexic. I done all my studies in Israel, in school, in a special need class. Nonetheless, I've managed to achieve a full matriculation degree, which is what you graduate with at 18. I fought for my education, and I'm very, by nature, motivated person, eager to do things, passionate, and learning to deal for the past over 15 years, that learning to pace myself, nobody taught me that. I had to learn it over myself. I wish I knew your theory, and that the GP, my family doctor, would have mentioned that. They were very well intent. I'm not saying, but just the awareness was not there of what to do for me. They wanted to help, but they were at loss. They were really not sure what's going on. So yes, so it's a very valid point. Usually we wake up, if we have some energy, we're desperate to do so many things because often our condition is developing between the ages of 20 and 40, but it can happen at any stage of life. I know people from the age of 6 that had it. So we are young people, and and at any age we are young people, if our mind wants to achieve something and not being able to do it, not because we don't want to live, it's because we don't have the energy to get on with basic things. So thank you so much for making that point and for your contribution in the field. I can't thank you enough from all of us at the with ME, and you yourself had ME, potentially still have it to a degree. I'm not sure. Maybe you can tell us a little bit about that. That's a personal story that would be, for me, it's always fascinating. I feel when I know someone have ME or been through ME, it's like another family member, because we understand each other to such a level. It's very bonding. Maybe you can tell us a little bit about that if you feel comfortable with that, and where do you see the field goes in the future, current research happening. I know there's a few things which are interesting for us always is if it's a post-viral, has genetics or environment factors play a role in how well we recover from a virus, or that's not related, it's just unlucky. A little bit, if you can touch on those things as well, that would be great.
Sure. I think generally patients are feeling demoralized as opposed to depressed. They feel like they've been victimized by an illness and then victimized by the reaction of people when they talk about the illness to either physicians or other people. So the real issue here is justice, and how do we give the rights back to people who basically have this particular condition. I had my own kind of issue with getting mono myself, and having very difficult time with it over time. And I was very fortunate that I was working in a university that provided me a tremendous amount of support. Even though I left my formal duties for a year, when I came back, they let me work for an hour a day, and I was okay. And I could just slowly build back up. But I had the fortune of having people that wanted to give me, a chance, because I'd been very successful up till then. But most people don't have that. When they get sick, they're closed out of the work setting and in many other settings. In terms of some of my current research, I do think it'll hopefully begin to provide some clues to what's going on. Why is it that an illness, hits one person and not another? There's probably genetic, there's probably a variety of factors that suggest why one person gets cancer, one person gets heart disease, and another person might get ME. The best way of trying to answer that question is you really want to capture people before they get ill. But the question is, how do you do that? Well, we cleverly came up with a way where we went into college students who just starting at a university, and we got thousands of them to give us blood samples and fill out questionnaires. And then we waited, because we know that mono occurs for a lot of young people when they go to college. It's spread pretty quickly. And those people who got mono, we then tested again, and then we followed them up. And some of them recovered from mono and some of them didn't. Majority of people do recover from mono, but about 10% don't. And at least at 6 months. So we are following those people, and we have their data, both biological as well as kind of self-report on their symptoms prior to getting that virus attacking them. And then why did some people recover and some didn't? What that is called is a prospective longitudinal study. And really, it's the best type of advantage to trying to answer the questions you're posing. And I think that the COVID-19 is also going to give us amazing opportunities to look at a particular virus and find out what happens over time with some of those individuals, and why some people seem to get better and some don't. And it's probably a complicated set of issues. One of our findings that we've already published is that the immune system of people who don't seem to recover after a viral attack seems to be kind of meshed together. The anti and pro-inflammatory cytokines or proteins seem not to be differentiated, whereas in healthy people, you've got the pro-inflammatory and anti-inflammatory proteins that are differentiated. So that could be, again, an interesting marker as to why certain people seem to be more predisposed toward not recovering. But we have a lot to learn, and that's the type of research that we're currently doing at DePaul University.
Thank you so much for explaining us a little bit about this. And it's amazing that you came up with this idea of taking blood samples of university people, and as you said, longitude. So we'll see over the years, we'll have more and more news. And I know those studies are in fact so valuable. I know some studies goes for 50 or 60, so even in future generations will be able to think about you and your team, and thank you, and future ME patients or other post-viral patients people would be. My other thing would be to talk to you about and to ask is that when we first start to feel unwell, or we're realizing whatever I just had, if it's as you said, mono, which is I think also known as the kissing disease, post-glandular fever, if I'm saying post-glandular fever. So let's say we start feeling unwell and we're suspecting this is not a normal, like flu symptoms that lasting a long time. Any suggestion to a newly ME patient, basically, on how to cope, who to go to, what can they tell the doctor, how can they get a diagnosis quicker? It took, in my case, probably 7 years to get a diagnosis. The first few years, I did not know what was going on. Unfortunately, I was a bit of a proud young man. I did 100-mile cycles. I ran 50 kilometers before, which is more than a marathon. So from being this strong guy to reduced to not being able to take the duvet off of me on my own. It was very difficult for me to tell anyone. I was embarrassed about this, which of course is ridiculous, but when you're in your early 20s and you're dating and you want to look good and you want to show that you're capable, then you put things aside and etc. But any advice on how to help people get diagnosed better and in general how to cope? You're first and foremost a psychologist, so also mentally, what can we tell ourselves, the voice in our mind, so it doesn't put us so much down and that there is some hope?
Sure. So what I tell patients is that you're going to have to become your own basically best ally. You're going to have to learn, you're going to have to read, you're going to have to find out stuff, because if you expect a physician or a magic pill to be out there, and a lot of people will spend early times just looking for that, it's a good chance you'll be disappointed. So you're going to have to really become, in the United States, we call it, we have this football game. It's a little bit different in Europe, but it's basically the mental health quarterback. You're going to have to be the person in charge. You're going to have to be the person that's going to basically figure out how to make it all work. And you're going to have to bring together a multidisciplinary team, the best people that you can basically bring together to sort of help kind of you feel better and how to cope with this illness. It might be involving going to a nutritionist. I mean, what are you eating? There might have to be a sleep person that comes in that helps you kind of deal with some sleep issues. There might be pain and pain control that has to get under control. There's a lot of different areas that this illness affects, and you're going to probably need to have the best in all these different areas to basically find out what works. You can often go to support groups or to places on the internet that will sometimes give you sources of, experts who might be able to be helpful. And in terms of the mental health area, clearly, I do think that it's very easy to get into what's called a yo-yo effect, where you basically rest and rest and rest, and you feel a little bit better, and then you try to do everything that you haven't done for the last few days, and then you get exhausted and you get sick, and then you have to rest, and then it happens again. I call that the yo-yo. And probably if one can just reduce when you're feeling better to sort of not push yourself, but just take it easy, and just have supports. And again, it's easy for me to say that. Some people are desperate and they just have to do things to survive. But if you can use your supports that you have to sort of give yourself a cushion so that you're not always in that type of situation where you've got more and more and more to do and you're never able to really just give yourself that chance to stay within that energy envelope. To me, I think that's probably the most critical thing. And recognize that this is going to be a long time. It's going to be a long journey. And it's not going to happen quickly, but you can basically make some improvements. You might not get cured, but you can, I think, have some improvements over time.
Thank you so much for that. And just on improvement, I can attest, I was for 2 or 3 years housebound, and as I mentioned, I struggled to get the duvet off of me. And although I'm far from 100% cure, and in a sense I'm not myself yet, but saying that, I did manage to run a cafe for a few years with my partner and a lot of other people that helped me, but I was able to work again. I'm able to do this podcast, not as consistently and as well researched as I would like to make it for you, but nonetheless, you can improve. I absolutely believe so. As I'm sure Dr. Jason, Professor Jason will say, sometimes we just improve naturally and sometimes we degrade naturally. We can try the best diet and it may help a little bit, and so just be patient with yourself, but absolutely, they call it clean your act. So make sure you have a good bed routine, as he just spoke about, the best nutrition supplement, as Professor he said. So what better gift could it be to learn, to master our own destiny, our own body, and research and do things from a place of, okay, I know actually why I'm drinking blueberry juice in the morning and eating a salad for lunch with some other proteins and fats and carbs, because we researched and understood it. We live with this machine. We have to take care of it. Unfortunately, no one else will. And I think you also touch your support group. If you can find someone, I know not everyone will understand and be able to cope with what we're going through, and it's okay. But if you can, 1 or 2 or 3 people that understand and are sympathetic to our cause and what we're going through, focus on them. Don't try to convince other people how much you're struggling. If they're not there, preserve your energies to cultivate with the people that are working with you. And also, maybe Professor, you can comment on that. This condition can make you feel low and some kind of depression sometimes, just because, not because you're depressed by nature, but just your capabilities are reduced, your livelihood is reduced. So if you feel that you're not feeling 100% emotionally since you develop it, or regardless, don't be ashamed to seek counseling, psychology, whatever helps. Would you agree, Professor?
So just think about, a person gets stripped of their energy, gets stripped of often their vocation, their job, have people in their social environment that question them, work associates basically say, why aren't you working? You look okay. And physicians who basically telling them to start getting involved in graded exercise and to basically the problems in their own mind. I'm almost amazed that everyone who has this illness doesn't have some psychological problem, given the abuse that they've basically undergone by having this condition. So yes, there's a tremendous amount of stress that occurs with any type of chronic illness, and particularly this one. But what's amazing is that so many people have been able to manage and figure out how to cope with all these types of situations. And truthfully, if one wants to think about the heroic figure of mythology, there's no better depiction of it than the patients with ME.
You are something else. You just really nailed it. And I'll tell you a small story here. I'll share with the audience. For my father, I was always a hero, not able to read and write. I have ADHD, so struggling to concentrate as well as a young child. I have a broken shoulder from birth, so I can't use my hand 100%. And for him, I was a mountain bicycle champion where the steering of the shakes and wobble crazy and give anyone. And despite all of that, I've managed to do well in school. I've always landed amazing jobs. And when I first developed ME, he was baffled he used to call me Mr. Motivation. That was my name, the motivated guy, the Tony Robbins kind of person. And when he saw that I'm struggling, he broke him. He broke him to see his son, which he's so proud of and strong and working since the age of 15 as well. But one time he sat with me and I explained to him how weak I feel and how much I sat with him one-on-one, and he looked at me in my eyes and he said, you are the true soldier. If this is what you're going through, you are a true soldier. And he said, I put my hands up for you. I wouldn't be able to cope as well as you do. And it's what you said. It's heroic going through this and living through that when many medical professionals have no idea what we're going through, and things. So thank you so much for that. So Professor Jason, I wanted to ask you two more things, if that's okay, and then maybe you can wrap it up. Some last thoughts, something you would like to tell us. Basically, somewhere I heard or read is that potentially as we get older, because the immune system seems to drop, some of the ME symptoms naturally go away. So your thoughts on that, if you heard of such a thing. And also about the cognitive impairment, the brain fog. Personally, for me, the brain fog is the toughest nut of all to get over. I don't know how to describe it sometime well enough. Maybe you can describe it a bit better and what it means. So if you can talk to us about this too. So it's the age. Is it true that with age the symptoms go down? And cognitive impairment. What is this brain fog, and is there anything we can do about it?
So my guess is that there's two spikes of recurrence. It's usually in adolescence in the late 30s. That's when it seems like this occurs. And I think what ultimately happens is over time, people who have had this illness learn how to just cope with it a little better. So that might be why things get a little bit better from people. But in terms of the immune system, I'm not sure we have really evidence as to what might be changing for people to make it either better or worse. In terms of brain fog, yeah, cognitive impairment is one of the classic symptoms of this illness. I think that clearly there's something that's happened in the brain. And I think there's research using T3s and MRIs and fMRIs that our group is very interested in doing research on. If we can get funded, and we're submitting actually a grant in about a week to NIH to look to see what's going on in the deep structures of the brain, where we do think something might be happening there. I don't know if you've heard of the word kindling, but with something like epilepsy, very low levels of stimulation get the brain to be very into kind of fits, seizures. And it's very possible that the brains of people with MECFS are very close to going into seizures from very low levels of stimulation. And if that's going on, being able to characterize that and identify that, I think would be most useful. So that's one of the things we hope to do.
Thank you. I know you are a professor in demand, so if there's anything you'd like to leave us with for this, I hope to do another one with you. Maybe the audience can get in touch with me and leave comments on the social media what you would like to hear from Professor Jason more in future. But any last thing to leave us with?
Well, just I thank you for giving me a chance to provide some of my thoughts on this field. Certainly medicine is very good at fixing broken bones and basically dealing with a wide variety of different acute illnesses. These types of illnesses that they consider unexplained are really the frontier of medicine. And to the extent that we can help people with these types of conditions, we then basically make a giant next important step for the field of helping people.
Thank you so much for your work. I would leave links below to your website and details if any of the listeners are in a position to help Professor Jason and his team raise funds as well, so the research keeps on going and expands. Please do so. Professor Jason, thank you so much for all your work and your time today. I look forward to connecting with you in the future.
Thank you very much.